All right, good morning, everybody. All right, today we are going to be reading chapters 17 and 18 of The Witches. We're almost done with the book, only a few more chapters left. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with chapter 17, The Plan. When we got back to the bedroom, my grandmother took both me and Bruno out of her handbag and put us on the table. "Why on earth didn't you speak up and tell your father who you were?" she said to Bruno. "Because I had my mouth full," Bruno said. He jumped straight back into the bowl of bananas and went on with his eating. "What a disagreeable little boy you are," my grandmother said to him. "Not boy," I said. "Mouse." "Quite right, my darling. But we don't have time to worry about him at this moment. We have plans to make. In about an hour and a half's time, all the witches will be going down to supper in the dining room, right?" "Right," I said. "And every one of them has got to be given a dose of mouse maker," she said. "How on earth are we going to do that?" "Grandmama," I said, "I think you are forgetting that a mouse can go places where human beings can't." "That's quite right," she said. "But even a mouse can't go creeping around on the tabletop, carrying a bottle and sprinkling mouse maker all over the witch's roast beef without being spotted." "I wasn't thinking of doing it in the dining room," I said. "Then where?" she asked. "In the kitchen," I said, "while their food is being got ready." My grandmother stared at me. "My darling child," she said slowly, "I do believe that turning you into a mouse has doubled your brain power." "A little mouse," I said, "can go scuttling round the kitchen among the pots and pans, and if he's very careful, no one will ever see him." "Brilliant!" my grandmother cried out. "By golly, I think you've got it." "The only thing is," I said, "how will I know which food is theirs? I don't want to put it in the wrong saucepan. That would be disastrous if I turned all the other guests into mice by mistake, and especially you, Grandmama." Then you'll just have to creep into the kitchen and find a good hiding place and wait. And listen. Just lie there in some dark cranny listening and listening to what the cooks are saying. And then, with a bit of luck, somebody's going to give you a clue. Whenever they have a very big party to cook for, the food is always prepared separately. "Right," I said. "That's what I'll have to do. I shall wait there, and I shall listen, and I shall hope for a bit of luck." "It's going to be very dangerous," my grandmother said. "Nobody welcomes a mouse in the kitchen. If they see you, they'll squash you to death." "I won't let them see me," I said. "Don't forget you'll be carrying a bottle," she said, "so you won't be nearly so quick and nippy." "I can run quite fast standing up with the bottle in my arms," I said. "I did it just now, don't you remember? I came all the way up from the Grand High Witch's room carrying it." "What about unscrewing the top?" she said. "That might be difficult for you." "Let me try," I said. I took hold of the little bottle, and using both my front paws, I found I was able to unscrew the cap quite easily. "That's great," my grandmother said. "You really are a very clever mouse." She glanced at her watch. "It's 7:30, she said. "I shall go down to the dining room for supper with you in my handbag. I shall then release you under the table with the precious bottle, and from then on you'll be on your own. You'll have to work your way unseen across the dining room to the door that leads to the kitchen. There'll be waiters going in and out of that door all the time. You will have to choose the right moment and nip in behind them. But for heaven's sakes, be sure that you don't get trodden on or squeezed in the door." "I'll try not to," I said. "And whatever happens, you mustn't let them catch you." "Don't go on about it, Grandmama. You're making me nervous." "You're a brave little fellow," she said. "I do love you." "What shall we do with Bruno?" I asked her. Bruno looked up. "I'm coming with you," he said, speaking with his mouth full of banana. "I'm not going to miss my supper." My grandmother considered this for a moment. "I'll take you along," she said, "if you promise to stay in my bag and keep absolutely silent." "Will you pass food down to me from the table?" Bruno asked. "Yes," she said, "if you promise to behave yourself." "Would you like something to eat, my darling?" she said to me. "No, thank you," I said. "I'm too excited to eat, and I've got to keep fit and frisky for the big job ahead." "It's a big job, all right," my grandmother said. "You'll never do a bigger one." All right, and that is the end of chapter 17. All right, chapter 18, In the Kitchen. "The time has come," my grandmother said. "The great moment has arrived. Are you ready, my darling?" It was exactly 7:30. Bruno was in the bowl finishing that fourth banana. "Hang on," he said, "just a few more bites." "No," my grandmother said, "we've got to go." She picked him up and held him tight in her hand. She was very tense and nervous. I had never seen her like that before. "I'm going to put you both in my handbag now," she said, "but I shall leave the clasp undone." She popped Bruno into it first. I waited, clutching the little bottle to my chest. "Now you," she said. She picked me up and gave me a kiss on the nose. "Good luck, my darling. Oh, by the way, you do realize you've got a tail, don't you?" "A what?" I said. "A tail, a long curly tail." "I must say that never occurred to me," I said. "Good gracious me, so I have. I can see it now. I can actually move it. It is rather grand, isn't it?" "I mention it only because it might come in useful when you're climbing about in the kitchen," my grandmother said. "You can curl it around and you can hook it on things and you can swing from it and lower yourself to the ground from high places." "I wish I'd known this before," I said. "I could have practiced using it." "Too late now," my grandmother said. "We've got to go." She popped me into her handbag with Bruno, and at once I took up my usual perch in the small side pocket so that I could poke my head out and see what was going on. My grandmother picked up her walking stick, and out she went into the corridor to the lift. She pressed the button, and the lift came up and she got in. There was no one in there with us. "Listen," she said, "I won't be able to talk to you much once we're in the dining room. If I do, people will think I'm dotty and talking to myself." The lift reached the ground floor and stopped with a jerk. My grandmother walked out of it and crossed the lobby of the hotel and entered the dining room. It was a huge room with gold decorations on the ceiling and big mirrors around the walls. The regular guests always had their tables reserved for them, and most of them were already in their places and starting to eat their suppers. Waiters were buzzing about all over the place, carrying plates and dishes. Our table was a small one beside the right-hand wall, about halfway down the room. My grandmother made her way to it and sat down. Peeping out of the handbag, I could see in the very center of the room 2 long tables that were not yet occupied. Each of them carried a notice fixed onto sort of a silver stick, and the notices said, "Reserved for members of the RSPCC." My grandmother looked towards the long tables but said nothing. She unfolded her napkin and spread it over the handbag on her lap. Her hand gently slid under the napkin and took hold of me gently. With the napkin covering me, she lifted me up close to her face and whispered, "I am about to put you on the floor under the table. The tablecloth reaches almost to the ground, so no one will see you. Have you got hold of the bottle?" "Yes," I whispered back. "I'm ready, Grandmama." Just then, a waiter in a black suit came and stood by our table. I could see his legs from under the napkin, and as soon as I heard his voice, I knew who he was. His name was William. "Good evening, madam," he said to my grandmother. "Where is the little gentleman tonight?" "He's not feeling very well," my grandmother said. "He's staying in his room." "I'm sorry to hear that," William said. "Today there is green pea soup to start with, and for the main course You have a choice of either grilled fillet of sole, or roast lamb. Pea soup and lamb for me, please, my grandmother said. But don't hurry it, William. I'm in no rush tonight. In fact, you can bring me a glass of dry sherry first. Of course, madam, William said, and he went away. My grandmother pretended she had dropped something, and as she bent down, she slid me out from under the table onto the floor under the table. Go, darling, go, she whispered. Then she straightened up again. I was on my own now. I stood clasping the little bottle. I knew exactly where the door into the kitchen was. I had to go about halfway around the enormous dining room to reach it. Here goes, I thought, and like a flash, I skittled out from under the table and made for the wall. I had no intention of going across the dining room floor. It was far too risky. My plan was to cling close to the skirting of the wall all the way around until I reached the kitchen door. I ran. Oh, how I ran. I don't think anyone saw me. They were all too busy eating. But to reach the door leading to the kitchen, I had to cross the main entrance to the dining room. I was just about to do this when in poured a great flood of females. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the bottle. At first, I saw only the shoes and the ankles of these women who were surging in through the door. But when I glanced up a bit higher, I knew at once who they were. They were the witches coming in to dinner. I waited until they had all passed me by. Then I dashed on towards the kitchen door. A waiter opened it to go in. I nipped in after him and hid behind a big garbage bin on the floor. I stayed there for several minutes, but listening to all the talk and the racket. By golly, what a place that kitchen was! The noise and the steam and the clatter of pots and pans, and the cooks were all shouting, and the waiters all rushing in and out from the dining room, yelling the food orders to the cooks. 4 soups and 2 lambs and 2 fish for table 28. 3 apple pies and 2 strawberry ice creams for number 17. Stuff like that going on all the time. Not far above my head, there was a handle sticking out from the side of the garbage bin. Still clutching the bottle, I gave a leap, turned a somersault in the air, and caught hold of the handle with the end of my tail. Suddenly, there I was, swinging to and fro, upside down. It was terrific. I loved it. This, I told myself, is how a trapeze artist in the circus must feel as he goes swishing through the air high up in the circus tent. The only difference was that his trapeze could only swing backwards and forwards. My trapeze, my tail, could swing me in any direction I want. Perhaps I would become a circus mouse after all. Just then, a waiter came in with a plate in his hand, and I heard him saying, "The old hag on table 14 says this meat is too tough. She wants another portion." One of the cooks said, "Give me her plate." I dropped to the floor and peeped around the garbage bin. I saw the cook scrape the meat off the plate and slap another bit on. And then he said, "Come on, boys, give her some gravy." He carried the plate round to everyone in the kitchen, and do you know what they did? Every one of those cooks and kitchen boys spat on the old lady's plate. "See how she likes it now," said the cook, handing the plate back to the waiter. Quite soon, another waiter came in, and he shouted, "Everyone in the big RSPCC party wants the soup." That's when I started sitting up and taking notice. I was all ears now. I edged a bit round farther to the garbage bin so that I could see everything that was going on in the kitchen. A man with a tall white hat, who must have been the head chef, shouted, "Put the soup for the big party in the large silver soup tureen." I saw the head chef place a huge silver basin onto the wooden side bench that ran along the whole length of the kitchen against the opposite wall. "Into that silver basin is where the soup is going," I told myself. "So that's where the stuff in my little bottle must go as well." I noticed that high up near the ceiling, above the side bench, there was a long shelf crammed with saucepans and frying pans. If I can somehow clamber up onto that shelf, I thought, then I've got it made. I shall be directly above the silver basin. But first, I must somehow get across to the other side of the kitchen, and then up to the middle shelf. A great idea came to me. Once again, I jumped up and hooked my tail around the handle of the garbage bin. Then, swinging upside down, then, hanging upside down, I began to swing. Higher and higher I swung. I was remembering the trapeze artist in the circus I had seen last Easter, and the way he got the trapeze swinging higher and higher, and had then let go and gone flying through the air. So just at the right moment, at the top of my swing, I let go of my tail and went soaring clear across the kitchen and made a perfect landing on the middle shelf. By golly, I thought, what marvelous things a mouse can do, and I'm only a beginner. No one had seen me. They were all far too busy with their pots and pans. From the middle shelf, I somehow managed to shimmy up a little water pipe in the corner. And in no time at all, I was up on the very top shelf, just under the ceiling, among all the saucepans and the frying pans. I knew that no one could possibly see me up there. It was a super position, and I began working my way along the shelf until I was directly above the big empty silver basin they were going to pour the soup into. I put down my bottle. I unscrewed the top and crept to the edge of the shelf and quickly poured what was in it straight into the silver basin below. The next moment, one of the cooks came along with a giant saucepan of steaming green soup and poured the whole lot into the silver basin. He put the lid on the basin and shouted, "Soup for the big party, all ready to go out." Then a waiter arrived and carried the silver basin away. I had done it. Even if I never got back alive to my grandmother, the witches were still going to get the mouse maker. I left the empty bottle behind a large saucepan and began working my way back along the top shelf. It was much easier to move about without the bottle. I began using my tail more and more. I swung from the handle of one saucepan to the handle of another, all the way along the top shelf, while far below me, cooks and waiters were all bustling about, and kettles were steaming, and pans were sputtering, and pots were boiling. And I thought to myself, oh boy, this is the life. What fun it is to be a mouse doing an exciting job like this. I kept right on swinging, and I swung most marvelously from handle to handle. And I was enjoying myself so much that I completely forgot that I was in full view of anyone in the kitchen who might happen to glance upwards. What came next happened so quickly I had no time to save myself. I heard a man's voice yelling, "A mouse! Look at that dirty little mouse!" And I caught a glimpse below me of a white-coated figure in a tall white hat. And then there was a flash of steel as the carving knife whizzed through the air, and there was a shoot of pain in the end of my tail. Then suddenly I was falling and falling head first towards the floor. Even as I fell, I knew just what happened. I knew that the tip of my tail had been cut off and that I was about to crash onto the floor, and everyone in the kitchen would be after me. "A mouse!" they were shouting. "A mouse! A mouse! Catch it quick!" I hit the floor and jumped up and ran for my life. All around me there were big black boots going stamp, stamp, stamp. And I dodged around them and ran and ran and ran, twisting and turning, and dodging and swerving across the kitchen floor. "Get it!" they were shouting. "Kill it! Stamp on it!" The whole floor seemed to be full of black boots, stamping away at me, and I dodged and swerved and twisted and turned, and then in sheer desperation, hardly knowing what I was doing, wanting only a place to hide, I ran up the trouser leg of one of the cooks and clung to his sock. "Hey!" the cook shouted. "Jeepers creepers, he's gone up my trousers! Hold on, boys, I'll get him this time!" The man's hands began slapping at the trouser leg, and now I really was going to get smashed if I didn't move quickly. There was only one way to go, and that was up. I dug my little claws into the hairy skin of the man's legs and scuttled upward, higher and higher, past the calf and past the knee, and onto the thigh. "Holy smoke!" the man was yelling. "It's going all the way up! It's going right up my leg!" I heard shrieks of laughter coming from the other cooks, but I can't promise you I wasn't laughing myself. I was running for my life. The man's hands were slapping all around me, and he was jumping up and down as though he was standing on hot bricks. And I kept climbing and kept dodging, and very soon I reached the very top of the trouser leg, and there was nowhere else to go. "Help, help, help!" the man was screaming. "It's in my knickers! It's running around in my flaming knickers! Get it out! Someone help me to get it out!" "Take off your trousers, you silly slob," someone else shouted. "Pull down your pants and we'll catch him soon." I was in the middle of the man's trousers now, in the place where the two trouser legs meet, and the zip begins. It was dark and awfully hot in there. I knew I had to keep going. I dashed onward and found the top of the other trouser leg. I went down it like greased lightning and came out at the bottom of it, and once again I was on the floor. I heard that stupid cook still shouting, "It's in my trousers! Get it out! Will somebody please help me to get it out before it bites me?" I caught a flashing glimpse of the entire kitchen staff crowding round him and laughing their heads off, and nobody saw the little brown mouse as it flew across the floor and dived into a sack of potatoes. I burrowed down in among the dirty potatoes and held my breath. The cook must have started taking his trousers right off because now they were shouting, "It's not in there! There's no mice in there, you silly twerp!" "There was! I swear there was!" the man was shouting back. "You've never had a mouse in your trousers! You don't know what it feels like!" The fact that a tiny little creature like me has caused such a commotion among a bunch of grown-up men gave me a happy feeling. I couldn't help smiling in spite of the pain in my tail. I stayed where I was until I was sure they had forgotten about me. Then I crept out of the potatoes and cautiously poked my tiny head over the edge of the sack. Once again, the kitchen was all a bustle of cooks and waiters rushing about everywhere. I saw the waiter who had come in earlier with the complaint about the tough meat coming in. "Hey, boys," he shouted, "I asked the old hag if the new bit of meat was any better, and she said it was perfectly delicious. She said it was really tasty." I had to get out of that kitchen and back to my grandmother. There was only one way to do this. I must make a dash clear across the floor and out through the door behind one of the waiters. I stayed quite still, watching for my chance. My tail was hurting terribly. I curled around so as to have a look at it. About 2 inches of it were missing, and it was bleeding quite a lot. There was a waiter loading up with a batch of plates full of pink ice cream. He had a plate in each hand and 2 more balanced on each arm. He went towards the door. He pushed it open with his shoulder. I leapt out of the sack of potatoes and went across that kitchen floor and into the dining room like a streak of light. And I didn't stop running until I was underneath my grandmother's table. It was lovely to see my grandmother's feet again in those old-fashioned black shoes with their straps and buttons. I shimmied up one of her legs and landed on her lap. "Hello, Grandmama," I whispered. "I'm back. I did it. I poured it all into their soup." Her hand came down and caressed me. "Well done, my darling," she whispered back. "Well done, you. They are at this very moment eating that soup." Suddenly, she withdrew her hand. "My darling, what's happened to you?" One of the cooks cut off my tail with a carving knife, I whispered back. It hurts like bilio. Let me look at it, she said. She bent her head and examined my tail. You poor little thing, she whispered. I'm going to bandage it up with my handkerchief. That will stop the bleeding. She fished a small laced-edged handkerchief out of her bag, and this she somehow managed to wrap around the end of my tail. You'll be all right now, she said. Just try to forget about it. Did you really manage to pour the whole bottle into their soup? Every drop, I said. Do you think you could put me where I can watch them? Yes, she answered. My handbag is on your own empty chair beside me. I'm going to pop you in there now, and you can peep out, as long as you are careful not to be seen. Bruno is in there as well, but take no notice of him. I gave him a roll to eat, and that's keeping him busy for a while. Her hand closed around me, and I was lifted off of her lap and transferred to the handbag. Hello, Bruno, I said. This is a great roll, he said, nibbling away at the bottom of the bag. But I wish there was butter on it. I peered over the top of the handbag. I could see the witches quite clearly sitting at their 2 long tables in the center of the room. They had finished their soup now, and the waiters were clearing away the plates. My grandmother had lit up one of her disgusting black cigars and was puffing smoke over everything. All around us, the summer holiday guests in this rather grand hotel were babbling away and tucking into their suppers. About half of them were old people with walking sticks. But there were also plenty of families with a husband, a wife, and several children. They were all well-to-do people. You had to be if you wanted to stay in the Hotel Magnificent. That's her, Grandmama, I whispered. That's the Grand High Witch. I know, my grandmother whispered back. She's the tiny one in black sitting at the head of the nearest table. She could kill you, I whispered. She could kill anyone in this room with her white hot sparks. Look out, my grandmother whispered. The waiter's coming. I popped down out of sight, and I heard William saying, Your roast lamb, madam. And which vegetable would you like, peas or carrots? Carrots, please, my grandmother said, but no potatoes. I heard the carrots being dished out. There was a pause. Then my grandmother's voice was whispering, It's all right. He's gone. I popped my head up again. Surely no one will notice my little head sticking out like this, I whispered. No, she answered. I don't suppose they will. My problem is I've got to talk to you without moving my lips. You're doing beautifully, I said. I've counted the witches, she said. There aren't nearly as many as you thought. You were just guessing, weren't you, when you said 200? It just seemed like 200, I said. I was wrong too, my grandmother said. I thought there were a lot more witches than this in England. How many are there? I asked. 84, she said. There were 85, I said, but one of them got fried. At that moment, I caught sight of Mr. Jenkins, Bruno's father, heading straight for our table. Look out, Grandmama, I whispered. Here comes Bruno's father. All right, and that is the end of chapter 18. We'll read chapters 19 and 20 next, and before you know, we'll be done with the book. All right, I hope everybody enjoyed that. I hope you all had a wonderful spring break. Remember to stay safe, stay healthy, but most importantly, remember that Miss Bell loves you, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.